Hi friends, welcome back to the studio. Today I thought I would share with you a painting that I just finished yesterday. Pretty quick, I did it in a couple of sessions and I had this beautiful view of my wildflower garden right outside of my house, and I just was so compelled to paint it. So I'm working on a piece of pastel mat, and it's a white pastel mat, and I decided to use some gouache. I love breaking out interesting different kinds of wet media for underpaintings. I'm using Daniel Smith gouache for the most part, and I believe I'm using Venetian red, Piedmontite, ultramarine blue, and Prussian blue, and a gold ochre. I wanted something very warm for my underpainting because this is a very, very green dominant kind of scene, and this is one of the great ways to really break up all of that green, is to lay some worms underneath it. Starting out by putting in the man-made structure, because I want to make sure that that's naturally going to draw the eye. If we have hard lines next to a lot of foliage and organic shapes, those hard lines, I want those to be fairly accurate, because if they're off, it will be very obvious. And what I'm really working on in this underpainting is first and foremost, getting the values, the shapes, so the drawing, and the values correct. They're not going to be perfect, and I'm not going to stress too much about it, but the closer that I can get those values to read correctly in the beginning, it will do a lot of work for me, and I won't have to make as many adjustments throughout the process. I always love coming in with a wet underpainting because I love painting with wet paint. And even though I love my dry pastels and they're really the love of my painting life, I do like to add wet underpainting in quite often. It also gives me the ability to get some really soft edges and interesting different color effects. And I will attempt to let some of that show through in the final piece. So I don't always work really hard to cover up my underpainting. The majority of it will be covered up. It's really nice to let some of the sparkle of that underpainting show through. And this is really the only chance that I'll get to have those very, very soft edges. I could smear and really soften a lot of my dry pastel, but I like having these beautiful transitional painterly kind of passages show through. So really thinking about where my darks are again, in my background, really just blocking those in, trying to do everything all at once. I'm not going to just like I do with my dry pastel, I'm not working one area to completion in my underpainting and then moving on. I need to look at the whole piece because every piece, every shape, every value informs all of the other shapes and values. I've sped this up, I think, it was a couple hours, and so I sped it up to 20 minutes because I don't want to talk for 2 hours, and you guys don't want to listen for that long. So obviously this is sped up, but I didn't cut anything out, so there's probably a few places where there's some pauses, and sometimes I step back and really slow down. We might see that, and you probably will see my back a few times. Sorry about that. So I've started to come in with the dry pastel, and you can see that I'm working, trying to maintain a very loose type of a mark making here. And I'll be doing some adjustments value-wise with those trees in the background. Everything in my paintings are really just constantly being adjusted. And, I'm working with a reference photo here, and I will see that, it's a constant struggle to not be trapped by your reference photo. And so I'll go back in and lighten up and cool down those background trees a few times throughout the piece, because I want to show that there is depth and distance in this piece. Those trees are quite a bit farther back than obviously my foreground. My house is in the middle ground, and then those trees are even farther back. So really I want those trees to be a little lighter and cooler than my house. And right now they're reading as darker, and so I'm going to have to fix that. I love starting with sort of a messy approach. It's a way of painting where I'm not focusing on details at all right now. That's not to say that I'm not putting in slashes of color and perhaps painterly mark making, but I'm doing it in a way that is very loose. And then as I get the values and colors in that I'm trying to get down into any given shape and section, I can then come in and tighten it up is not really the word I'm looking for, but start to adjust with smaller marks. Sorry that my camera obviously got pushed back a little bit. It will come back in soon and you'll get to see a little closer. Working in a little bit around the house, one of the things that I like to say is that if I can't see it without zooming in, so if I'm looking at my photo reference and I have to zoom in to try to find detail, that tells me something. That tells me that I don't want to put a lot of detail in that area. I'll do my best to not zoom in. I will simply put a few dabs and dots and keep it the way that I see it without getting too detailed. That would overwork the piece and lose the freshness and lose focus, right? Because if I'm putting a bunch of dots and more details into an area that I can't really see a lot of detail in, that's going to distract the viewer. We're going to put too much stuff back there. Let's talk a little bit about the color choices I've made for this piece. This is an overcast day, which means that the light is very diffused, and it's a cool light because there's no direct sun, shining down. And so I've got this cool light. So I love painting with cool light because I really get to play with some warmer shadows, and it really brings life to your shadows and to the piece. It also works really well since I did this very, very warm underpainting. I can really capitalize on that, and it helps me remember that I want to keep some really warmer passages in my shadow areas. Which means also that I'm really doing my best to use some cooler greens on some of the areas that are being directly affected by the sky and the light. So especially that, I don't know what some of the names of these wildflowers are. We bought a mix of perennials and native Northwest wildflowers for this area. But, they have a pretty cool, when I look at that big section of foliage on the mid and upper left, there's a lot of darker, cooler kind of greens in that area. So I can really capitalize on that and dramatize some of those cools, which will help the temperature of my scene and show that I've got this cool light. And then I've got these beautiful lighter and warmer flowers and grasses that are going to help us kind of lead the viewer through the piece. And I'll work on those here shortly. I just love getting crazy with my greens. It's just so fun to me. You know, I love painting greens. I've got a lot of greens in my area. So it's just something that I'm naturally drawn to describing in my work. I'm using a variety of pastels, different brands, and generally working from harder pastel to softer, but by no means is that a hard and fast rule. It's just that it's typically easier to work with a harder pastel first. But if you use a light enough touch, which I highly recommend practicing doing, you can really use hard over soft, and it doesn't really matter. I'll often come in with a harder pastel towards the end of a piece and glaze. It's a wonderful way to unify a passage or a shape. You know, you can take a harder pastel and lightly scumble it over softer, no problem if your touch is light enough. You can see I still haven't fully covered up all of the underpainting yet. I'm not concerned about that. I'm just focusing on starting to get color all over the piece, getting pastel all over, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. I'm using Giroux on the house. I really like the shape of the Giroux. And I'll come in a couple of times with the trim on the house. I haven't quite figured out the colors that I want to use on that yet. I end up putting a warmer, almost a kind of a greenish yellow for the trim, simply because one of the reasons anyway is that it's a little bit too close in value and temperature to the sky right now. So I'll come back in and adjust that. I really need to get the ground and the grasses and the main foliage in before I start with my flowers. So that's what I've been working on. And you can see that if you squint down, I've really differentiated the shapes in my grasses and flower shapes before I come back in and start to meld them back together with some mid-tone kind of bridge values, if you will. And that just helps me. It's just the way that I paint. Some artists might do it differently, and there's no right or wrong way. But I really like to differentiate my darks and my lights and then kind of bridge them. And here you can see that I've really started in with some of those yellow flowers. And I will kind of go overboard with them and then have to kind of glaze some greens and some midtones back over them to reintegrate them back into the ground and back into some of the green foliage. I have a beautiful maple tree up outside the front of my house, and I'm just kind of indicating it with a very loose kind of a few red marks up there to indicate that, but I don't want to put too much detail into it because I can't really see it. It's kind of far away. I really want the focus to be on the garden. And now I'm having fun, starting to come back in with a little bit more detail, starting to put some of those flowers in. I don't want to go overboard. And here I'm switching it up. I'm not sticking to my reference photo too closely. There's there is quite a bit more of a line with some rocks and other things at the bottom of the house, but I didn't really like how that looked. I decided to just bring some grasses up, a similar value, a little bit lighter, but right along the edge of the house and the grasses. I decided that I really wanted to meld that together. I didn't want the eye coming in and really sticking right there. And that's how I felt it was. So I needed to adjust that. I'm really starting to work into the 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 ground plane here a little bit more, working all over the piece at once. And just because this is a dominantly cool light, that does not mean that I'm going to stick to this strict formula of just cool light and warm shadows either. Light is bouncing around everywhere, and there's going to be cools and warms throughout the entire piece. At least that's how I work. Predominantly, yes, there will be cools where the light is kind of hitting the forms, when we think about shapes, there's all of these little shapes. Some of the shapes in the foliage are pointing or, flat planes up towards the sky. And those areas will have cooler colors and temperatures on them. And then in the shadows where there's not as much cool being reflected, some of the warmer colors are going to shine through because there's not direct light hitting them. So we'll see the warmer passages. But overall, I'll be putting warms and cools throughout the piece because that's how light works. That's how that's what really is happening out there. So one of the things that I'm doing is, I told you that part of my process is starting messy, and then I'll slowly work into refinement, kind of like a sculptor would start out with these big blocks, shaving off big blocks from the stone, and then slowly working into detail. I'm also kind of doing that with, in a way, with the smaller shapes. I'll come in, put a flower or put a mark in, and then kind of break it and come in and go over it with another mark, and then maybe come back in and replace it. So it's this back and forth. It's a dance between the breaking and remaking of shapes and colors. And I'm actually getting really close to the finish now. You can see that I've put several colors into my sky. I've used a mostly predominantly cool violet. I've put some blues in there and then lightened it up with some lighter pinks down into the V of those trees coming down towards the house. And that will not only lead the viewer throughout the piece by lightening it up and warming it up, but that's also how the sky appeared to me, a little bit warmer towards the horizon. I really had a lot of fun with this piece, and I'm putting in some colors that I don't see in my garden, but I'm taking some artistic license because we're allowed to do that as artists. Thanks for coming along with me. I put the reference photo in for you guys. You've requested that before, and I've forgotten to do it, or I try to not, use my reference photo too strictly. And so, I'd say like halfway through the piece, I don't even look at my reference photo much from that point on. But there it is. You guys feel free to paint along if you want to. And I'm going to just let you finish watching here. I'll put on some music for a minute. Thanks for coming along with me, and I'll see you next time.